to EchelonOrchid. And inside my lair, I've been thinking about human trafficking, specifically the trafficking of children. What happens to these kids after they've been recovered? What's that rehabilitation process look like? How much of a problem is this in the United States and even across the world? When I first got into this subject, it happened to be at one of my former employers. I was a young security engineer, and one day I got a call from the FBI. And the FBI agent had said, "You're trying to meet a 14-year-old girl." Well, I knew I wasn't trying to meet a 14-year-old girl. But at this time, back in 2001, or may have even been 2000, the tools and techniques that we were using in law enforcement were very rudimentary because we were just getting into the age of the internet. And so I explained to the agent, after validating and verifying that he was an agent, that every single person at my employer is using the same IP address. So we went through the process. We helped him find who the individual was. And then this person, well, got arrested and their employment was terminated. At that point in time, I decided I wanted to try to use my knowledge for good. So joining me today is Veronica from Children's Voice. She's the president of Children's Voice, and interesting to me, how I first met Veronica is because she's also an executive recruiter. Veronica, welcome to EchelonOrchid.
Thank you, Dan. I'm delighted to be here. Nice to see you in person. Well,
yes, virtually, virtually. So, Veronica, my first question for you is, I would say, and I would ask, you somewhat left what I believe to be a lucrative career in recruiting and decided one day to just kind of let that go and get to Children's Voice. What were some of those reasons? What prompted you to make this decision in a very noble cause?
Well, interestingly, just about a year ago, I was at RSA and I met with the founder of Children's Voice, Joe Saunders, who owns a cybersecurity company in DC called RunSafe. And we met, to discuss recruiting because he had recently received funding, and we discovered that we were both fellow U of M grads, and we were putting the time aside to talk about how we could help him staff. But I had noticed in prepping for the meeting that he had also founded this nonprofit, and there are a lot of causes that I care about. And over the last, I would say, 9 years or so, I've been using my voice for good, so to speak, and gotten involved in advocacy on different topics. But human trafficking and child trafficking specifically is something that is just really hard to wrap my brain around. And I definitely didn't understand the scope of the problem here in the U.S. My impression of it was that, we have people that are trafficked from other countries. And I was learning around that same time that I met him that it's going on in our own communities here in the US in every zip code. And having a 14 and 11-year-old and, being concerned about online safety and all that, I just started doing some digging. So we met a year ago, and at that time I was still recruiting, but I just feel this calling, literally. I now understand what the true definition of vocation means, because I really can't be here on this planet and have it accepted that children are being bought and sold for sex. Humans, but most specifically children, because we're supposed to be protecting them.
Yeah, it is extremely noble cause, and you're right. We're supposed to be protecting our children, and an abuse of children is, to me, just an unforgivable crime on humanity, and the the amount of innocence that's just lost in that child when they're hurt at such a very young age for something like sex. It's something that can these children even recover mentally, emotionally, physically? I would say maybe, but that emotional and mental state. I mean, do they ever really recover?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of layers of trauma, and so yes, they can recover with a lot of support. But admittedly, the life expectancy of a person who's been trafficked as a child, which the average age is 12 years old, that a child is trafficked, and there's all sorts of emotional and mental health recovery that they have to go through. And they're certainly susceptible to depression, other types of mental illnesses, addiction, and they can heal, but they need a lot of support. And unfortunately, oftentimes it's the people that they trust most that are doing the betraying, or either it's a family member that's trafficking the child, which I know is incomprehensible, or they're running away from a very bad situation at home, and running away and potentially living on the streets is making them extremely vulnerable to traffickers.
I can imagine, and I start to think about the world that we are in today of COVID-19, the different types of protests that are going on, certain types of environments like Chaz, or I can't remember what they've renamed it to. Do you think that we're going to see an uptick, or have we already seen an uptick in human trafficking because of these types of environments? People aren't getting out as much. Things are able to be secluded.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely all sorts of violent crimes are on the rise since COVID, and particularly domestic violence and human trafficking. And the reason that most of these it's happening in all communities, but certainly in inner cities where this is their survival, and there is now all of this other financial devastation happening. It just puts people at even more risk.
It is just a shame, and we hear stuff about COVID in terms of our health, but there are so many other ramifications, it appears, to this situation. Human trafficking could be on the rise. Of course, the financial aspect. But I mean, really, when it comes down to we're trying to protect our children, I just can't imagine what a parent might be going through, and what that child really goes through. What's the typical age of someone being abducted and put into the child sex slave trade? I think is the right word. What's the average age?
It was 12 to 14, but it seems like it's evening out right at 12 as the entry point. And I've been talking to different people over the last couple months, trying to get my brain around this whole landscape, from law enforcement to mental health to policy. And the most vulnerable are kids that are either runaways and homeless, or certainly the foster care system has been known to be also an avenue where that happens. Unfortunately, it's just, and again, an added layer of trauma and heartbreak, because these children already don't have their real parents, and so they're being placed in the care of other adults that they are trusting are going to love and take care of them, and they are the ones that end up putting them back into a dangerous situation. It's hard to absorb. It really is hard to imagine. Like you said, I appreciate the fact that you even allow your brain to be willing to go there. Like what getting raped once would be a traumatic is a traumatic event. What's it like to be a 12-year-old kid getting raped 10 times a day? You know, and think about what we were doing at 12 years old. We were riding our bikes, we were out, you know, playing sardines and running bases and all the things that we did when we were 12 years old. And the innocence that is stolen from them is such a travesty. It's really, it is hard to process. And I think, you know, getting into this work and starting to raise awareness about it, my experience so far has been that people just, they don't want to hear it because it's just too painful. But that's not an acceptable, you know, state of affairs. Like if we don't get upset about it and we don't try to put ourselves in and empathize, what could that possibly be like? Then, you know, that perpetual cycle of abuse is going to continue. We need everybody to be up in arms to say, no, not ever, we're not doing this to children. We need to protect them, and we all have a responsibility. And I think particularly parents, you know, should be raising their voice on the subject and seeing how they can get involved.
You know, I can't even imagine what anyone would go through mentally, emotionally, and physically of being raped. I can't believe and can't even fathom what a child who's not even able to really rationalize what is going on and have those, I would say, maybe built-in defense mechanisms that might be able to help them shield this at a later time, let alone it happening multiple times a day. You know, that is just the, you know, just the emotions that I'm feeling just trying to think about that is hard to take, so I can't even imagine what a child must be going through. And I am shocked and appalled that there's not more people looking to end this in the world. And when you tell me that a lot of people just kind of like tune this out, I go, what's wrong with the society when we're not willing to step up and donate to the cause, volunteer some time, anything? That we can always do something. And it's just, you know, that hurts, you know, me to the core that people aren't willing to do more.
Too, I appreciate you saying that, because it can feel like lonely work sometimes, you know, and I think people have good intentions, but I think it is a very indicative, it's very indicative of the spiritual disconnection that's happening individually and collectively in our country, in our world, you know, because if you are tuned in and you are living consciously and you know, having that mindset of how can I help, how can I serve, then there's no way that you could ignore this topic.
Absolutely. I don't see, other than I know people tend not to want to think about bad things because most of us are good people. And I have the same conversation when it comes to, you know, at least similar, not the conversation about child trafficking, but when people try to imagine what it's like to be a hacker. And I say it's difficult for good people to think in a bad way for very long because we're not built for it. We're not built that way. And I just happen to have, you know, 20 plus years of experience of thinking like a bad person. And thankfully I'm still not a bad person, and I will always make the mistakes because I genuinely have good intent. Well, these people don't have good intent. And so what do we do then? And this is why I think we have organizations like you and people like you who feel this passion to get it out there. Are you know, boys or girls more susceptible to human trafficking? You know, I read these horror stories of people going to other countries and primarily for sex with underage boys, as men having sex with underage boys. Is that a true thing? Is it more of an equal split?
It's definitely both. I think it's more weighted toward girls, but absolutely boys are extremely vulnerable as well. And that's another very difficult conversation that we need to be having individually with amongst our families and our communities and in our country. We have a major pedophilia problem in our country, and that's been indicative of child sexual abuse has been a problem before it was being commercialized. But I do think that porn is not helping the situation, because there is quite a lot of stuff out there geared toward the schoolgirl fantasy, and I think it's definitely fantasy. It's definitely feeding that fantasy of men wanting to be with young girls. Because if you watch interviews with survivors who are now out of the situation and talking about it, and who is buying them for sex, who's actually doing this, and it's not our old stereotype of what a pedophile is, with the van and the luring with the candy and whatever. These are the people that are arrested for this are principals, police officers, heads of state government, and then of course we know about the elites and higher ups. But I read recently that the average salary of a person who, and the demographic overall is they make $100,000. They're men between 40 and 55, and they have 2 kids themselves. So that's we really need to have these hard conversations, and I do think that porn is contributing to that desire.
I tend to agree with you, and I'm sitting here wondering why the legal system protects, I think, under the First Amendment, as to why we can act, in pornography as someone that is underage. And I know for it to be legal, they have to be of age. But that mental image perpetuates violence in the future. And certainly these things, the studies seem to be pretty clear that there is a higher propensity for these things happening with the fantasy of having sexual relations with a minor. I just don't understand.
I know. And honestly, I don't know if you've seen any of my posts about Pornhub and the organization Exodus Cry that on a campaign to shut them down. They have over 1 million signatures now, but there are cases of children, not like, we're not sure if they're like 17 or 18 or 19 or 21 girls. They're children being raped and it being filmed, and Pornhub not only not taking it down, but like putting ads toward it. And so there are a handful of people that are really fighting very hard to expose. MindGeek is the parent company, but to expose, because they claim they claim that they check, and if something is not appropriate, they take it down immediately. But they have taken it down, but it's ended up back up somehow. And so even if you're not consuming that particular genre of pornography, I think that we need to look at, do we want to support organizations that are willing to profit from other people's suffering?
it's just a, it's another one of those things. If you're an adult and you want to watch, pornographic material, feel free. The way I look at it. But when you start encouraging the fantasy of being with someone underage, and there's just unfortunately too many sick people out there that want to do this, and of course they're filming it. It's quite heavily found in the dark web, so we know it's there, and we know that there is an entire economy associated with the distribution of child pornography. And sometimes they don't even do it with money. Sometimes it's, hey, I've got these 10 videos, I want your 10 videos because I want to get my collection of child porn higher. And so they trade in this as a commodity as well. It's mine. It's just sickening to me. I don't even know where to really go, and I get the feeling that the legal system in this case is, I don't understand why they're allowing something like this in terms of the First Amendment. But that kind of gets me to, back to the legal system. Why do you think the United States only within the past several years, I think it was maybe 2016, 17, when they finally put a law in the book making child trafficking illegal?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have that background. I can tell you from talking to somebody that's in policy in DC. She basically told me that there have always been laws around child sexual abuse and rape, and that's really what's still happening. Human trafficking is getting a lot more attention these last couple of years, but she highlighted that we need to proactively be talking about prevention, and it goes back to those vulnerable populations, people who are homeless, children who are being abused and running away from that situation. And she made a really interesting point that I had not heard until just this week, which is, I don't know if you've heard the term survival sex. Have you ever heard that term?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And so, sometimes there'll be a teenager or that, somebody that's underage, but they really don't have, they might not even be trafficked, but they feel like they've been trafficked in the past. They're not being trafficked in this particular time, but they don't feel like they have other ways to make money. They don't have the education, they don't have resources, they don't have a house to sleep in. And so they really feel like that's a viable option. And it's, they're not going to be denied a job, like if they were to go apply somewhere with no education and in clothes that clearly show that they are homeless. So I think we need to really figure out how to help these more vulnerable populations. And she talked about policies. Trying to think of she said in 2017 there were, the same time that bill got approved, there was one around homeless and runaway youth that got declined. And so it's like, whatever you want to call it, the victims are the same, so it's a hard question, and I don't have that legal perspective, but that's my little understanding to date. I'm only 5 months into this.
And I imagine you're going to continue learning, even about these things, and it's probably just going to make you even angrier and sadder based on where we're at with humanity. You would think
Yeah.
We would be evolving as a species, not declining. And I wonder, have we always just been this evil as a human race, or are we just now better at finding the people that do this?
It's an important question. I think that there's always been this evil versus good dynamic, and that there always will be people that are good and always people that act in ways that one can't understand. But there is.
I think that's a good way, or a good segue into, let's talk about the good Children's Voice is doing and what you're doing. Right? We talked about a lot of the evil aspects. Yeah, so you joined this 5 months ago. What's some good that Children's Voice is doing now? How many kids so far have you been able to help? What kind of help are you providing?
Yes, thank you for asking that. And it's funny, I actually talked to a cybersecurity friend / professional earlier today about something completely different, but I had said to her, you're just around some adversity that she was facing, and like, we won't die from our feelings, so there are a lot of days that I've cried myself to sleep. I actually cried earlier today about something that I learned this morning, and yet
and I imagine you're going to continue learning even more about these things, and it's probably just going to make you even angrier and sadder based on where we're at with humanity. You would think we would be evolving as a species, not declining. And I wonder, have we always just been this evil as a human race, or are we just now better at finding the people that do this?
We are human, we're resilient, and we have resources to help us reconnect with the truth of who we are and the goodness that is out there. And so as life is never like always all up here, and it's never all down there. It's totally a continuum of up and down. And so you just have to learn to manage those emotions. But I think it's just an important thing to note, because there is so much good. And so, yes, like we just talked about all this hard.
Well, I think that's a good way, or a good segue into, let's talk about the good Children's Voice is doing and what you're doing. All right, we talked about a lot of the evil aspect. Yeah, so you joined this 5 months ago. What's some good that Children's Voice is doing right now? How many kids so far have you been able to help? What kind of help are you providing?
Yet there's tons of good. There are amazing organizations that are out there on all fronts. Like I said, from law enforcement to legal to mental health, and then these safe houses that have been created for survivors who may not they don't necessarily always do great going back into the public school system, and they don't have a family to go back to. So there are these wonderful safe houses that are created where they have a home mother. I forget what the term is. And it's a group of usually 4 women. They have one for boys too, but they're same sex. And they have homeschooling, so they have education come to them, and they do this homeschooling there. And then they also have, trades that they learn. Some may teach mindfulness, meditation, ideally yoga. It depends on the safe house, but those places are where these kids begin to heal. And so one of the best parts about taking on this role at Children's Voice is learning who's doing what. And it's just so inspiring to meet all these leaders and founders and employees of these organizations that care about the topic that in the same way that we do. And I think the more we create awareness, there'll be more and more people that are ready to just tell them what to do. They just need to really grasp it. So in terms of children's voice, Joe Saunders, like I said, is the founder, and he just happened to know, he has 2 teenage daughters, and about 5 years ago, there was a girl in his Virginia community who was trafficked. It's a long story, but somebody asked for his help and intervention, and so he helped get this girl to safety and get her the emotional support that she needed. But then he raised money to create a scholarship so that she could go to college. So she got her GED. And then I actually talked to her today. She lives in Morocco, and she's teaching English to young kids, and she's graduating this summer. And that she is the person that inspired Children's Voice, and she is thriving and doing well, and it's a great success story. And so she's really our model. He's helped with one of our other board members, Juliet, is an immigration attorney, and they've helped a handful of other kids get basic needs, mental health treatment. But the scholarships is really where we're focusing on going forward, because there are all these other amazing organizations filling those other needs. And so we want to provide a path to empowerment and to success, so these kids can actually go on to thrive in society. And most of them will not have an opportunity to go to college otherwise. And so that's where our funds are going for the money that we're just starting to raise. Going forward, it will be, for kids to attend college. So we're forming partnerships with these different organizations. So, for example, with a Safe House, they can refer candidates that are ready, for that, to go on to that next stage.
Well, that's great. How can the people that are listening out there, how can they donate? How can they, not just funds, but, how can they help get more involved? And of course, how can they donate?
Yeah, well, we have a GoFundMe set up, and so you can donate on our website, and every bit does count. Every bit matters, and that is hugely impactful, and we appreciate that contribution. Also, for people who may know high net worth individuals that may have money set aside for a cause they care about, particularly related to children, any referrals to people that this may be in alignment with their desire to give back. And then also corporations, companies who have a corporate giving program, and it could be, say, in the hospitality or airline industry, where it's aligned, they already aware of this problem and it's in line with their mission. Some companies like Marriott, have foundations. So anyone that's in an organization where they think that the vision for Children's Voice aligns with their company mission, and their industry may be tied in some way to the kids that are, being trafficked, those referrals are hugely welcome. At this point, we really need to get the word out, and connections are the way to do that. Word of mouth, just like us reconnecting.
Absolutely, and I hope that many people will see this. I hope that many people will donate. It's an absolutely a worthy cause. Veronica, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. I appreciate even more that you have taken up this cause, because it is something that I hope we can eradicate. And I hope you will come back on and update us on some of the things that you're finding. Not just that, but there's a part of what I try to do with everyone that comes on. What is a goal that you have that we can, my audience and myself, can help make sure you're accountable for? So not only you come back on and talk about children's voice, but a goal that you have that we can help you be accountable for.
Thank you, Dan. Like I said, it's so awesome to connect with people that have this on their heart, and so I really appreciate you taking the time to invite me on. And we have a hefty fundraising goal. We just started, and we want to raise $1 million by the end of the year. So yeah, we have that gene of the magic of thinking big, and there's so many kids to help, and that's just going to be scratching the surface, because ultimately we want to create a platform where we are connecting all of these different trafficking organizations and children and any person that's a victim, it kind of in one hub, so we don't have all these disparate people doing different things. So our ultimate goal is to create a unified platform. But in the first year between now and December, which is rapidly approaching, donors is where we need the most support.
All right. Well, I hope we're able to help you get to that point. Veronica, again, I appreciate it so much. And if there's anything that I can do for you in the future as well, please don't hesitate to call upon me.
Thank you, Dan. I truly, truly appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
All right.
Take care.
I'll see you again.
Bye now.